Are you experiencing denials of ambulance services from Medicare? Are these denials related to medical necessity or lack of documentation? If so, this video will assist you when billing and documenting ambulance services. As we talk about Medicare's guidelines for these services, we'll also share the common errors we see and how to avoid them in the future. In our medical review of ambulance claims, we find two common reasons causing claims to deny. First, the documentation submitted is insufficient to support the medical necessity of the service. Second, the documentation of mileage for the trip is not captured or matching what's submitted on the claim form. So, let's discuss coding ambulance services and mileage, starting with the most frequently billed HCPCS codes. Basic life support, code A0428. Advanced life support, code A0427, and mileage, code A0425. There are requirements for these services to be properly documented, submitted, and paid. I mentioned that during our medical reviews, we regularly find what was submitted to support the ambulance services billed is either not sufficient or the medical need for an ambulance wasn't evident in the documentation. So how do you know what information is required or expected? Let's review the Medicare guidelines for ambulance services. Medicare guidelines state that medical necessity is established when the patient's condition is such that use of any other method of transportation is contraindicated, meaning that it would cause harm to the patient. For instance, if the patient is unconscious or in shock, or if they require other emergency treatment during transport, this should be documented. If the need for the ambulance is not clear, the claim may be denied. Next, the ambulance guidelines say that if any other method of transportation could be used without endangering the patient's health, no payment may be made for ambulance services. So say the patient is dealing with an injured arm or leg that may be broken. That alone is not reason enough to warrant an ambulance, and the claim may be denied. Another Medicare guideline is that in all cases, the appropriate documentation must be kept on file and made available upon request. So let's consider common documentation errors identified by our medical review team. Ambulance transport not supported. Bed confinement not indicated. Mileage not documented. Let me explain each of these common documentation errors in more detail. For the ambulance transport not being supported, documentation did not include information stating that the patient's condition was such that the use of other means of transportation was contraindicated, meaning there was no information showing that the patient was so bad off that they couldn't have been taken in another vehicle. Be sure your documentation clearly indicates the medical necessity for ambulance transport as opposed to another means of transport. The second error relates to the patient's status of bed confinement. Following Medicare guidelines, medical necessity requirements are met when a patient is bed confined and thus needs to be transported. So what does bed confinement mean? This means they are unable to get up from bed without assistance and unable to ambulate and unable to sit up in a chair or wheelchair. All three of these must apply to qualify for bed confinement. Just documenting bed rest does not meet the requirement for bed confinement. Here's an example of documentation that did not meet the definition of bed confinement. In the documentation submitted and reviewed, the patient was found on a couch, seated, assisted to a stretcher, and was able to get up without assistance. So this patient may not have been well, but is clearly not bed confined. And documentation does not support the medical necessity for ambulance transport. Make sure the criteria for bed confinement that we just covered is clearly documented in the medical record. Next, let's look at our third error relating to mileage. Code A0425 was denied. The number of loaded miles was not documented in the medical record as required. So let's talk about mileage in more detail. The Medicare ambulance guidelines specifically state that charges or mileage must be based on loaded mileage only, meaning from the place of patient pickup to their destination. A good question to ask is, how should you document the mileage? Well, Medicare has specific guidelines for how to capture miles. If the distance is less than 100 miles, then the mileage should be rounded to the nearest tenth of a mile. So if you traveled 99.9 miles, report 99.9 units. If it's 100 miles or greater, the mileage should be rounded to the next whole number mile without using a decimal. So if you traveled 998.5 miles, report 999 units. In cases where it's less than 1 mile, still round to the nearest tenth, but be sure to put a 0 before the decimal point. For instance, 0.9 miles is reported as 0.9 units. And how should you measure mileage? Well, the good thing is that there is no specific way Medicare requires providers to measure mileage. Providers are responsible for ensuring they have the necessary equipment to be able to measure mileage to the 10th of a mile. Options include digital or analog odometers, global positioning systems, or GPS, and onboard computers or navigation systems. The specific device is optional, as long as the mileage is tracked to the 10th of a mile and clearly documented. Finally, when billing mileage, each unit on the claim must coincide to each mile transported. So 12.9 miles would equate to 12.9 units, and documented miles and units should match. If there's conflicting information, this may result in denial. There may be payment for the ambulance care, but not the mileage. Be sure to verify that the mileage documented matches the units submitted on your claim. We've covered top errors relating to documenting and billing ambulance services, and to help address these errors, here are some questions to ask before billing. Does your documentation support the medical necessity for an ambulance, or could another means of transportation have been used? Was the patient bed confined to the point of needing an ambulance? Do the miles measured and calculated by your tracking device match what's been placed on the claim? Answering these questions will help support that your documentation meets Medicare's guidelines for a medically necessary ambulance transport. We hope you learn more about billing and documenting ambulance services for Medicare. You can visit our website for more resources and to check out our other educational videos. And again, thanks for watching.